What would you do if your child walked out the door for a simple morning routine and never came back? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. Imagine watching your 17-year-old daughter grab the leash, call to the family dog, and step out into what seems like just another peaceful Saturday morning in Oregon. The sun is shining, birds are chirping, and everything feels perfectly normal. You wave goodbye through the kitchen window, maybe even smile at how responsible she's become, taking the golden retriever for their regular walk through the neighborhood trails. Has this ever happened to you? That moment when ordinary life suddenly becomes your worst nightmare? For Sarah Mitchell, that Saturday morning in Oregon started like countless others before it. Emma, her bright and ambitious daughter, had developed a beautiful routine of walking. Max, their loyal golden retriever, every weekend. It was one of those small family traditions that brings comfort to a mother's heart, knowing your child is responsible, getting fresh air, and bonding with the family pet. The kind of innocent activity that makes you feel like you're doing something right as a parent. But sometimes the most ordinary moments become the gateway to extraordinary terror. What you're about to discover might surprise you, because this isn't just another missing person case that fades into statistics and cold files. This is a story that will challenge everything you think you know about trust, safety, and the people we allow into our children's lives. As the hours ticked by that morning, Sarah's initial concern slowly transformed into panic. Emma was always punctual, always responsible. When evening came and neither Emma nor Max had returned, the worst possibilities began flooding Sarah's mind. The police were called, search parties organized, volunteers combed through every trail and pathway in the area. But here's what makes this case absolutely chilling. There was no trace, no footprints leading off the beaten path, no torn clothing caught on branches, no signs of struggle. It was as if Emma and Max had simply vanished into thin air. For 365 days, Sarah Mitchell lived in a purgatory that no parent should ever experience. The not knowing, the constant hope that the phone might ring with good news, followed by the crushing disappointment when it didn't. The way well-meaning friends and family members slowly stopped asking about the case, assuming the worst while trying to help her move on. The sleepless nights spent wondering if her daughter was still alive somewhere, calling for help that would never come. Stay with me until the end, because what happened next defies every expectation and reveals a truth so disturbing that it will make you question everyone in your child's life. After 12 months of silence, of cold leads and dead ends, Detective James Rodriguez found himself walking up Sarah's front steps on another crisp Oregon morning. But this time, he wasn't bringing the closure that most missing person cases eventually deliver. This time, he was bringing something that would restart the nightmare in ways that Sarah never could have imagined. The case was about to take a turn that would expose not just what happened to Emma, but reveal a calculated predator who had been hiding in plain sight. Someone who had spent months carefully orchestrating the perfect crime. Someone Sarah had trusted. Someone the entire community had trusted. And it all began with a discovery in the Oregon wilderness that no one saw coming. That morning, Detective Rodriguez carried with him news that would transform everything Sarah thought she knew about her daughter's disappearance. The breakthrough came from the most unexpected source, a revelation that would challenge every assumption about what had happened in those Oregon woods. Paul Thompson had been pursuing his passion for wildlife photography and conservation research in the Cascade National Forest. As an experienced hunter with a deep respect for nature's patterns, he'd invested in cutting-edge thermal drone technology to track deer migration routes through the dense woodland. It was a decision that would inadvertently unlock the first real clue in Emma's case. On that particular morning, Paul was methodically scanning the forest canopy when his thermal imaging equipment picked up something that didn't fit the usual wildlife patterns. The heat signature was puzzling, medium-sized, stationary, and positioned in a way that seemed unnatural for wild animals. Paul's initial assumption was that he'd located a coyote or perhaps an injured deer, but something about the thermal reading felt different. The shape, the size, the way it remained perfectly still against the tree line. His instincts told him this warranted closer investigation. What Paul discovered through his drone's advanced imaging capabilities would send shockwaves through the entire missing persons investigation. The thermal signature wasn't revealing a wild animal at all. Instead, his technology had detected Max, Emma's golden retriever, very much alive and apparently restrained in a remote section of the forest. After 365 days of being missing, the family dog had somehow survived in conditions that should have been impossible for a domestic animal. This discovery sparked an immediate transformation in how everyone viewed the case. The hidden truth behind Max's survival raised questions that no one had considered before. How does a house-trained golden retriever survive an entire Oregon winter in the wilderness? How does a dog accustomed to regular meals and comfortable shelter endure months of harsh weather conditions? The impact of these revelations forced investigators to completely reimagine their understanding of what had happened that Saturday morning. Detective Rodriguez knew that Max's survival wasn't a miracle of nature or remarkable canine resilience. Behind the scenes of this apparent impossibility lay a calculated human hand. Someone had been deliberately maintaining the dog's life, ensuring his survival while keeping him hidden from the extensive search efforts that had combed through those same woods multiple times over the past year. The journey from Paul's thermal discovery to understanding its full implications revealed layers of deception that went far deeper than anyone had imagined. This wasn't a case of a lost pet finding ways to survive in the wild. This was evidence of ongoing human intervention, of someone who had reasons to keep Max alive while ensuring Emma remained missing. The psychological impact on Sarah was overwhelming. Hope and terror intertwined as she realized that if someone had been caring for Max all this time, what did that mean for Emma? When the rescue team reached Max's location deep in the Cascade National Forest, what they found defied every expectation about how this story should unfold. The transformation from hopeful discovery to disturbing revelation began the moment they loaded the golden retriever into their vehicle and rushed him to the Northern Oregon Emergency Veterinary Clinic on Route 101. Dr. Rachel Thompson, a seasoned veterinarian with over 15 years of experience treating everything from routine checkups to emergency wildlife rescues, was not prepared for what she would uncover during Max's examination. Her initial assessment revealed something that would fundamentally shift the entire investigation's trajectory. This wasn't a case of remarkable canine survival against impossible odds. This was evidence of deliberate, calculated human intervention. The hidden truth lay in the details that only a trained professional would recognize. Max's body condition was far too good for an animal that had supposedly been surviving independently in the Oregon wilderness for 12 months. His weight, while reduced, wasn't consistent with the severe malnutrition expected from a year of scavenging. His coat, though matted and dirty, showed signs of periodic care. Most revealing of all, when Dr. Thompson examined his stomach contents, she found clear evidence of recent feeding, dry dog food that had been consumed within the previous 12 hours. Behind the scenes of this apparent miracle of survival was a disturbing pattern of systematic maintenance. Someone had been making regular trips to that remote forest location, ensuring Max remained alive while keeping him hidden from the extensive search efforts that had swept through those same woods repeatedly over the past year. The psychological impact of this revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. If someone had been caring for Max all this time, what did that mean for Emma? The journey from hope to horror accelerated as Dr. Thompson continued her examination. The evidence painted a picture of meticulous planning and long-term commitment to keeping the dog alive. This wasn't random acts of kindness from a passing hiker who occasionally spotted a stray dog. This was systematic, deliberate care designed to serve a specific purpose. The mindset required to orchestrate such a deception revealed a level of calculation that transformed everyone's understanding of what they were dealing with. Detective Rodriguez found himself confronting decisions that would reshape the entire investigation. The discovery meant that Emma's disappearance wasn't a spontaneous tragedy or even a crime of opportunity. Someone had planned this with frightening precision, understanding that keeping Max alive would serve their purposes while simultaneously tormenting Emma's family with false hope and misdirected search efforts. The impact of these revelations rippled through the entire law enforcement team. They were no longer searching for evidence of what had happened to a missing girl and her dog. They were now hunting someone who had demonstrated the patience, resources, and psychological manipulation necessary to maintain this elaborate deception for an entire year. The transformation in their approach was immediate and intense. When Sarah finally stood in that sterile examination room at the Northern Oregon Emergency Veterinary Clinic, her emotional journey took another devastating turn. The transformation from relief at seeing Max alive to horror at understanding the implications began with a single, seemingly small detail that would expose the true depth of this calculated deception. As she reached out to touch Max's familiar golden fur, Sarah's trained eye immediately caught something that sent chills down her spine. The red leather collar with its distinctive brass nameplate and identification tags, the one she had personally fastened around Max's neck that last Saturday morning, was gone. In its place was a plain blue collar, completely devoid of any identifying information. Someone had deliberately removed every trace of Max's connection to Emma and their family. The hidden truth behind this collar switch revealed a mindset so calculating that it forced everyone to reconsider the nature of what they were dealing with. This wasn't the impulsive decision of someone who had stumbled upon a lost dog and felt sorry for it. This was evidence of premeditation, of someone who understood exactly how identification tags could disrupt their carefully orchestrated plan. The psychological impact on Sarah was devastating. Realizing that someone had been close enough to Max to change his collar meant they had been handling him, controlling him, using him as part of some larger scheme. Dr. Thompson's detailed examination revealed even more disturbing evidence. The fresh rope burns around Max's neck from being tied to that tree were just the most recent injuries in a pattern that told a much darker story. Beneath his matted fur, she discovered older scars, healed rope marks that indicated Max had been restrained repeatedly over extended periods. The journey these injuries documented wasn't one of recent captivity, but of systematic, long-term control. Behind the scenes of Max's apparent wilderness survival was a reality that no one had imagined. The evidence suggested that Max had been held in multiple locations, moved periodically, restrained consistently, and maintained, just well enough to serve whatever purpose his captor had in mind. The impact of understanding this level of planning and patience was overwhelming for everyone involved in the investigation. Sarah found herself confronting decisions about what these revelations meant for Emma. If someone had invested this much time and effort into keeping Max alive while systematically hiding his identity and location, what did that suggest about their intentions regarding her daughter? The transformation in her thinking was both hopeful and terrifying. If Max's captor had shown this level of care in keeping him alive, perhaps Emma was also being maintained somewhere, but the psychological manipulation required to orchestrate such an elaborate deception painted a picture of someone capable of unimaginable cruelty. Detective Rodriguez found himself staring at the evidence board in his office, connecting dots that painted a picture far more sinister than anything he'd encountered in his 15-year career. The transformation in his understanding of the case came when he stepped back from the emotional relief of finding Max alive and focused on the cold, hard logic of the timing. This wasn't serendipity or luck. This was a carefully orchestrated revelation designed to serve a specific purpose. The hidden truth behind Max's discovery lay in its precision. Someone had waited exactly 1 year, then positioned the dog in a location where modern thermal technology would inevitably detect him. The mindset required for such patience and calculation revealed they were dealing with someone who understood both technology and human psychology. This person knew that finding Max alive would reignite hope, redirect search efforts, and create exactly the kind of community mobilization that was now unfolding across Oregon. Within hours of the news breaking, Sarah's phone began ringing with calls that would transform her quiet home into the epicenter of the largest volunteer search effort Riverside County had ever seen. Principal Rebecca Thompson's voice carried genuine emotion as she explained how the entire Riverside High School community was ready to mobilize. The impact of Max's discovery had created a ripple effect that reached every corner of Emma's former school, inspiring teachers, staff, parents, and even current students to drop everything and join the search. Behind the scenes of this remarkable community response, someone was watching, waiting, perhaps even participating. The journey from Max's discovery to this massive volunteer effort was playing out exactly as the perpetrator had likely anticipated. Detective Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had orchestrated Emma's disappearance was now manipulating the very people trying to find her, using their compassion and determination as tools in some larger psychological game. Sarah's living room quickly transformed into a command center that buzzed with activity and purpose. Maps of the Cascade National Forest covered every available surface, while volunteers arrived with professional-grade equipment, first aid supplies, and sophisticated communication devices. The psychological impact on Sarah was overwhelming. Seeing her community rally with such passion gave her hope while simultaneously terrifying her with the realization that whoever had taken Emma was intelligent enough to predict and potentially exploit this exact response. The decisions being made in those frantic hours of organization would determine not just the success of the search efforts, but potentially Emma's fate. Among the sea of familiar faces volunteering their time and expertise was someone whose presence would soon reveal the most shocking truth of all. The transformation from community helper to prime suspect was about to unfold in ways that would shatter every assumption about trust, safety, and the people we allow closest to our children. Among the volunteers gathering in Sarah's living room that evening, one figure stood out in ways that would soon prove deeply disturbing. Michael Stevens, Emma's 35-year-old AP biology teacher, arrived with a level of preparedness that seemed almost too perfect for someone supposedly dropping everything to help with an emergency search. The transformation from concerned educator to suspiciously over-equipped volunteer began the moment he walked through Sarah's front door. While other teachers and parents had arrived in casual clothes, with basic supplies, Stevens appeared in head-to-toe professional hiking gear that looked brand new. His moisture-wicking shirt, convertible pants, and high-end boots suggested someone who had either been planning outdoor activities or had prepared specifically for this moment. Behind the scenes of his helpful demeanor was a level of organization that raised questions about his true motivations. The hidden truth about Stevens' unusual preparedness became even more concerning when he spread detailed topographical maps across Sarah's kitchen table. These weren't basic Forest Service maps that someone might grab from a visitor center. These were professional-grade charts with elevations, trail markers, and terrain features highlighted in different colors. The mindset required to obtain and prepare such detailed materials on short notice suggested someone who had been thinking about search operations long before Max was discovered. But it was Stevens' intimate knowledge of Emma's personal struggles that truly set off alarm bells in Sarah's mind. As he offered condolences and support, he began referencing details about Emma's psychological state that no typical teacher should have known. He spoke with unsettling familiarity about her academic anxieties, her feelings about her parents' divorce, and her fears about disappointing her mother. The impact of hearing these private details discussed so casually by her daughter's teacher sent chills down Sarah's spine. The journey, from appreciation to suspicion, accelerated as Stevens continued revealing information that crossed every appropriate boundary between teacher and student. He described conversations about Emma's college goals, her insecurities about her intelligence, and her need for validation in ways that suggested a relationship far more personal than anything that should exist in a classroom setting. The psychological manipulation, evident in how he spoke about these tutoring sessions, painted a picture of someone who had been systematically gaining access to a vulnerable teenager's innermost thoughts. Sarah found herself confronting decisions about whether to trust her growing discomfort or dismiss it as paranoid thinking brought on by the stress of the day. The transformation in her perception of Stevens was gradual but undeniable. His helpful facade was beginning to crack, revealing something darker underneath. His eagerness to lead a search team, his unusual preparedness, and his inappropriate knowledge of Emma's personal life were creating a pattern that demanded attention. The moment that would transform Sarah's growing suspicions into concrete alarm came during what should have been a routine coordination meeting in her own kitchen. Stevens had positioned himself at the head of the table, directing volunteer assignments with an authority that seemed natural for an experienced teacher, when his phone buzzed against the wooden surface. The message preview was visible, for just a split second before he quickly flipped the device face down, but Sarah caught enough to feel her blood turn cold. Stick to the plan. 4 words that carried implications no innocent volunteer should have received during an emergency search operation. The hidden truth behind Stevens' nervous reaction, the way his hand trembled slightly as he covered the phone, the forced casualness of his voice when he dismissed it as probably other teachers checking in, revealed someone operating under pressure that had nothing to do with finding Emma. Behind the scenes of his helpful facade, Stevens was clearly communicating with someone about maintaining some predetermined course of action. The psychological impact on Sarah was immediate and intense. The journey from grateful appreciation for his help to bone-deep suspicion accelerated as she watched him struggle to regain his composure. His mindset had shifted from confident leader to someone desperately trying to maintain control of a situation that was spiraling beyond his expectations. The transformation in Sarah's perception reached a tipping point when she decided to trust her instincts and directly confront the inconsistencies she'd been noticing. Her voice remained steady despite the churning in her stomach as she questioned him about Emma's tutoring schedule. Stevens insisted with unwavering confidence that their sessions had been on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but Sarah knew with absolute certainty that wasn't true. The memories were crystal clear in her mind. Those Monday and Wednesday evenings when she worked late shifts at the hospital, always leaving dinner prepared in the refrigerator for Emma because of those after-school sessions. The impact of this deliberate deception hit her like a physical blow. If Stevens was lying about something as basic as when he met with her daughter, what else was he hiding? The decision Sarah made in those next few moments would determine whether she continued playing along with his charade or began actively investigating the man who had volunteered to lead the search for Emma. Stevens' attempt to gaslight her by suggesting that memory can be tricky during stressful times only strengthened her resolve. The way he doubled down on his false version of events, combined with that suspicious text message, painted a picture of someone who was not just lying, but actively working to maintain some larger deception. The revelations were piling up, too quickly to ignore. Unable to shake the growing dread that was consuming her thoughts, Sarah slipped away from the bustling coordination meeting and climbed the stairs to Emma's room. The transformation from downstairs chaos to the preserved silence of her daughter's space felt like stepping into a time capsule. Every detail remained exactly as Emma had left it that Saturday morning. The purple comforter neatly arranged, textbooks stacked precisely on her desk, pencil cup organized with the meticulous care that had always made Sarah proud of her daughter's discipline. The journey to uncovering the hidden truth began when Sarah opened Emma's desk drawer, searching for the academic planner that had been Emma's constant companion throughout high school. Her daughter's methodical nature meant everything was documented with color-coded precision, each appointment and assignment recorded in neat handwriting that reflected her perfectionist mindset. What Sarah discovered in those pages would shatter every assumption she'd held about her daughter's relationship with Stevens. The evidence was undeniable and horrifying. Rather than the consistent Tuesday-Thursday schedule Stevens had claimed, Emma's planner revealed a scattered pattern of meetings that became increasingly frequent and irregular over time. Sessions were often rescheduled at his request, moved to different days, extended beyond normal school hours, and frequently marked with notes about canceled activities or missed lunch periods. Behind the scenes of what should have been routine academic support was a deliberate pattern of isolation and increasing control. But it was the language in Emma's personal notes that truly revealed the psychological manipulation at work. Written in her distinctive purple ink were entries that made Sarah's hands shake as she read them. References to being Stevens' special student, descriptions of gifts that had to be kept secret, and most disturbing of all, mentions of their special connection that other people wouldn't understand. The impact of these revelations hit Sarah like a freight train as she recognized the classic patterns of grooming disguised as educational mentorship. The transformation in her understanding was complete and devastating. Stevens hadn't been providing extra academic help, He had been systematically manipulating a vulnerable teenager who was struggling with her parents' divorce and desperate for approval. The decisions he had made to isolate Emma during private sessions, provide special privileges, and create an atmosphere of secrecy were textbook examples of predatory behavior that Sarah had somehow failed to recognize. Each entry painted a clearer picture of how Stevens had exploited Emma's academic anxieties and need for validation. His praise for her potential, his insistence that their methods remain private, and his ability to make her feel chosen and special were all calculated moves designed to create dependency and compliance. The mindset required to orchestrate such systematic psychological manipulation revealed someone capable of far more sinister actions than inappropriate teacher behavior. As Sarah continued reading through Emma's meticulously kept planner, the hidden truth became even more disturbing with each page she turned. The transformation from academic mentor to predator was documented in Emma's own innocent handwriting, revealing a systematic progression that made Sarah's stomach churn with recognition of how completely she had been deceived. The references to Stevens' secret study spot appeared repeatedly throughout the later entries, described with the kind of excitement that only a naive teenager could express about something so sinister. Emma had written about this special location with genuine enthusiasm, believing she was part of an exclusive educational experience that other students couldn't access. The psychological impact of reading her daughters. Trust and gratitude for what was clearly deliberate, isolation was devastating for Sarah. Behind the scenes of what Emma perceived as privilege and special attention was a calculated strategy to remove her from any potential witnesses or interruptions. Stevens had convinced her that this secret location was necessary because other students would be jealous of the advanced learning opportunities he was providing. The mindset required to manipulate a teenager into believing that secrecy was for her own protection revealed someone who understood exactly how to exploit youthful insecurity and desire for acceptance. But it was the discovery of the pink bracelet entries that truly confirmed Sarah's worst fears about the nature of Stevens' relationship with her daughter. Emma had written about receiving this gift with such genuine happiness, describing how Stevens told her she had earned it by being his best student. The journey from teacher appreciation to inappropriate gift-giving was documented in Emma's own words, showing how he had conditioned her to see these rewards as natural consequences of their special bond. The decisions Stevens made to swear Emma to secrecy about these gifts demonstrated his awareness that his behavior crossed professional boundaries. His explanation that other students would be jealous and might say mean things was a classic manipulation tactic designed to make Emma feel protective of their relationship while isolating her from potential sources of guidance or intervention. The impact of realizing how thoroughly he had convinced her daughter to hide their interactions was overwhelming. Sarah found herself confronting revelations that painted a clear picture of grooming disguised as educational mentorship. The transformation in her understanding was complete. Stevens hadn't been helping Emma academically. He had been systematically preparing her for something far more sinister. Each secret meeting, each special gift, each request for secrecy had been carefully designed to normalize inappropriate boundaries and create the psychological dependence that would make Emma compliant with whatever he had planned. With Emma's planner clutched in her trembling hands, Sarah made a decision that would either save her daughter's life or put her own in mortal danger. The transformation from concerned mother to determined detective happened in an instant, as she realized that calling the police with diary entries and suspicions might not be enough. She needed concrete evidence, and the only way to get it was to trust her instincts and follow Stevens herself. As the volunteer search teams prepared to depart from her driveway, Sarah positioned herself in her Toyota Camry where she could observe Stevens' silver Honda without being noticed. The psychological impact of watching him confidently direct other volunteers while knowing what she now knew about his true nature was almost unbearable. Behind the scenes of his helpful facade was someone who had been playing an elaborate game with her family for over a year. The moment that confirmed her worst fears came when Stevens pulled out of her driveway and turned south on Highway 101, heading in the complete opposite direction from where the search teams were supposed to operate. The hidden truth about his intentions became crystal clear. He had never planned to search for Emma at all. The mindset required to volunteer for a search mission while secretly heading somewhere else revealed someone operating with a level of deception that took Sarah's breath away. The journey that followed tested every ounce of Sarah's courage as she maintained a careful distance behind Stephen's Honda. His driving pattern immediately revealed someone who was either expecting to be followed or was actively checking for surveillance. The transformation in his behavior from confident volunteer coordinator to nervous, paranoid driver confirmed that whatever he was doing had nothing to do with finding Emma and everything to do with protecting his own secrets. Stevens made several inexplicable stops that painted a picture of someone operating according to a predetermined plan. At an abandoned fruit stand on the side of the highway, he sat in his car for several minutes, constantly checking his mirrors and scanning the surrounding area with the vigilance of someone expecting trouble. The impact of watching this behavior through her binoculars made Sarah's hands shake as she realized she was witnessing the actions of someone who was definitely hiding something significant. The decisions Stevens made during these stops, the way he positioned his car for quick escape routes, his constant surveillance of the road behind him, his obvious nervousness despite being alone, all pointed to someone who was involved in something far more serious than inappropriate teacher behavior. The revelations were mounting with each suspicious action, each nervous glance, each deviation from normal behavior. After nearly 30 minutes of following Stevens through increasingly rural roads, Sarah watched his Honda turn into a gravel driveway leading to a craftsman-style house that seemed to emerge from another era. The transformation from suburban neighborhoods to this isolated property felt like crossing into a different world entirely. Hidden behind overgrown rhododendrons and towering Douglas firs, the house at 4847 Pine Ridge Road appeared to be the perfect location for someone who needed absolute privacy. The psychological impact of seeing Stevens use a key to enter this property hit Sarah immediately. This wasn't a random stop or a coincidental detour. He belonged here. Using her phone's internet connection, she quickly searched the property records, and what she discovered made her blood run cold. The house had belonged to Eleanor Stevens, who had died in November 2018, leaving the property to her grandson, Michael. The hidden truth behind his access to this isolated location was becoming terrifyingly clear, but it was the timeline that truly confirmed her worst fears. According to the rental listing history, Stevens had taken this property off the market in June 2022, just 3 weeks before Emma's disappearance. The decisions he had made to remove potential tenants and ensure his exclusive access to the property aligned perfectly with when he would have been planning something that required complete secrecy and control. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be a well-maintained family home was evidence of something far more sinister. Sarah observed the property carefully from her hidden position, noting details that painted a picture of irregular but purposeful occupation. Fresh tire tracks in the gravel suggested recent visits, but accumulated newspapers on the front porch indicated that no one was living there full-time. The mindset required to maintain a property for clandestine purposes while keeping up appearances of normal family ownership revealed someone who had been planning this deception for months. The journey from suspicion to certainty accelerated as Sarah realized the strategic advantages this location offered. The house was far enough from any neighbors to ensure privacy, surrounded by dense forest that would muffle any sounds, and accessible via back roads that would allow someone to come and go without being noticed by casual observers. The impact of understanding how perfectly situated this property was for hiding. Someone, against their will, made Sarah's heart race with a mixture of terror and hope. The revelations were mounting too quickly to ignore. Stevens had access to an isolated property that he had deliberately removed from the rental market just weeks before Emma vanished. He was supposed to be leading a search team, but had instead driven directly to this hidden location. The transformation in Sarah's understanding was complete. She wasn't just following a suspicious teacher anymore. She was tracking someone who had likely been holding her daughter captive for over a year. Knowing she needed concrete evidence before involving law enforcement, Sarah made the most dangerous decision of her life. She parked her car behind an abandoned barn about a quarter mile from the Stevens property and began making her way through the dense Oregon forest on foot. The transformation from worried mother to determined investigator happened with each careful step through the undergrowth, her heart pounding as she approached what might be her daughter's prison. The journey through the woods felt like moving through a nightmare in slow motion. Every snapped twig under her feet sounded like a gunshot in the forest silence. Every bird call made her freeze in terror that she might be discovered. Behind the scenes of her careful approach was a mother's desperation driving her forward despite every instinct screaming at her to call for help and wait for professionals to handle this situation. The hidden truth about what Stevens had been doing with his grandmother's property became devastatingly clear when Sarah reached the back of the house and crouched low near what appeared to be a small ventilation window. The psychological impact of what she saw through that narrow opening would haunt her for the rest of her life. There, hanging on the back of a desk chair in what was unmistakably a converted basement classroom, was Emma's distinctive purple backpack with its small patched rip that she'd fixed with a smiley face iron-on. The mindset required to create what Sarah was observing through that window revealed someone who had spent months, possibly years, planning this elaborate prison. The basement had been completely transformed from what must have been an old root cellar into a functioning living space designed to serve Stephen's twisted educational fantasies. A whiteboard covered one stone wall, filled with notes about cellular respiration in Stephen's precise handwriting that Sarah recognized from Emma's returned assignments. But it was the evidence of long-term habitation that truly confirmed her worst fears. The narrow bed pressed against the stone wall, the small refrigerator humming quietly in one corner, the microwave positioned on a makeshift counter, and what appeared to be a bathroom area sectioned off with a privacy curtain. All of it painted a picture of someone who had been living in this underground space for an extended period. The impact of realizing that Emma had been held in this converted root cellar for over a year was almost too overwhelming to process. The revelations continued as Sarah's eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through the small window. Educational materials were arranged with the same meticulous organization that Stevens brought to his regular classroom, suggesting he had been continuing some twisted version of Emma's education while holding her captive. The decisions he had made to soundproof the space, install proper ventilation, and create a functional living environment demonstrated a level of premeditation that was absolutely chilling. As Sarah's eyes continued to adjust to the dim lighting filtering through the ventilation window, the full scope of Stephen's psychological manipulation became horrifyingly clear. This wasn't just a basement prison, it was a continuation of his twisted educational mission. The textbooks stacked on the desk were current editions from Riverside High School, the same ones Emma would have been using in her senior year. The transformation from legitimate teacher to captor hadn't ended his educational obsession. It had allowed him to create the ultimate controlled learning environment. The whiteboard dominated one wall, covered in Stephen's precise handwriting about cellular respiration and mitochondrial function. Lessons that should have been taught in a bright, safe classroom surrounded by peers, not in an underground stone prison. Behind the scenes of what he undoubtedly saw as personalized education was the mindset of someone who believed he could provide Emma with superior learning experiences by removing her from the distractions of normal teenage life. The psychological impact on Sarah intensified as she realized that Stevens had been continuing Emma's education for over a year, maintaining the illusion that this captivity served some higher academic purpose. The decisions he had made to stock the space with legitimate educational materials, maintain proper lesson plans, and create structured learning sessions revealed someone who had convinced himself that this imprisonment was actually beneficial for his victim. The hidden truth about the nature of Emma's captivity became even more disturbing when Sarah heard footsteps descending stairs somewhere outside her field of vision. Stephen's voice drifted through the ventilation window, and the casual, possessive tone he used made her blood freeze in her veins. He was speaking to someone below, his words carrying the same confident authority she remembered from parent-teacher conferences, but twisted into something sinister and controlling. "I brought lunch, turkey and Swiss, your favorite," Stevens said, his voice muffled but clearly audible through the window opening. The journey from teacher to captor was complete in those words. The false intimacy of knowing someone's preferences combined with the absolute control of deciding when and what they would eat. The impact of hearing him speak with such casual ownership over another person's basic needs was devastating for Sarah. But it was what came next that confirmed her worst fears and filled her with a hope so fragile she was afraid to acknowledge it. A young female voice responded from somewhere below, too quiet for Sarah to make out the exact words, but unmistakably familiar. The revelations crashed over her in waves. Emma was alive. She was here, and she was responding to Stephen's manipulative conversation as if this had become their normal routine. The moment Sarah heard that young female voice responding to Stephen's, her entire world shifted on its axis. Even muffled through the basement walls, there was no mistaking it. That was Emma's voice, her daughter's voice, speaking for the first time in over a year. But the transformation in her tone was heartbreaking. Gone was the confident, animated teenager Sarah remembered. This voice sounded resigned, weary, carrying the weight of someone who had learned to navigate a reality that no 17-year-old should ever have to endure. The hidden truth about Emma's psychological state became clear as Sarah strained to hear more of the conversation. Her daughter wasn't screaming, wasn't pleading for help, wasn't expressing the terror or desperation that Sarah would have expected. Instead, Emma's responses suggested this daily routine of controlled interaction had become normalized over the months of captivity. The mindset required to adapt to such circumstances spoke to both her daughter's remarkable resilience and the devastating effectiveness of Stephen's psychological manipulation. Behind the scenes of what sounded like a casual conversation between teacher and student was a relationship built on coercion, control, and systematic brainwashing. The journey from independent teenager to compliant captive was evident in every resigned word Emma spoke. The psychological impact on Sarah was overwhelming. Relief at knowing Emma was alive warred with horror at understanding how thoroughly her spirit had been broken by months of isolation and manipulation. Sarah's hands trembled violently as she fumbled for her phone, pressing herself against the cool metal of the HVAC unit to muffle any sound she might make. The transformation from observer to active participant in Emma's rescue began with that desperate 911 call. Her whispered words carried the urgency of a mother who had finally found her missing child, but understood that one wrong move could cost Emma her life. 911. What's your emergency? The dispatcher's calm voice seemed surreal against the pounding of Sarah's heart as she tried to explain the impossible situation while remaining undetected. Her whispered explanation about finding her missing daughter held captive by her teacher at 4847 Pine Ridge Road felt like something out of a nightmare, but the evidence was undeniable. Emma was alive, she was here, and she needed immediate help. The decisions Sarah made in those crucial moments would determine whether Emma's rescue succeeded or whether Stevens would have time to escape with his victim. The revelations about Emma's condition, her psychological state, and the sophisticated nature of her imprisonment meant that this wasn't going to be a simple matter of police arrival and arrest. Stevens had spent over a year conditioning Emma to accept this captivity, and breaking that psychological control would require careful handling. The moment that would transform this covert rescue operation into a life-or-death chase happened in an instant of terrible luck. As Sarah shifted her position to get a better angle for the 911 dispatcher, her foot came down on something that shattered with a sound like a gunshot echoing through the quiet Oregon afternoon. A decorative solar light lay in pieces beneath her shoe, its plastic housing split and glass scattered across the ground in a pattern that would haunt her dreams. The psychological impact of that sound was immediate and devastating. Sarah's carefully planned surveillance had just become a desperate fight for survival. The hidden truth about Stephen's mental state was about to be revealed in the most terrifying way possible, as the back door of the house slammed open with such force that it bounced off the exterior wall. Stephen stood there in the doorway, his composed teacher facade completely shattered, replaced by something primal and furious. The transformation from helpful volunteer to dangerous predator was complete as his eyes scanned the yard with predatory intensity. "I know you're there, Sarah," he shouted, his voice carrying a rage that made her blood freeze. "You followed me. You couldn't just trust me to search for her, could you? The journey from hiding place to desperate flight began as Sarah abandoned all pretense of stealth and ran toward the tree line. Behind the scenes of her panicked escape, Stevens was pursuing her with the single-minded focus of someone who had too much to lose to let her escape alive. The mindset that had allowed him to kidnap and hold Emma captive for over a year was now directed toward eliminating the threat that Sarah represented to his carefully constructed world. But it was Stevens' shouted justifications during the chase that revealed the true depth of his delusion. As Sarah crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at her clothes and skin, she could hear him behind her screaming explanations that chilled her to the bone. "You don't understand what Emma really needs," he yelled, his voice growing closer. "The pressure you put on her, the mediocre education at that school, I'm protecting her from a world that doesn't appreciate gifted students like her." The revelations contained in his desperate rants painted a picture of someone who had convinced himself that kidnapping was rescue, that imprisonment was protection, and that his twisted educational obsession was somehow beneficial for his victim. The impact of hearing these delusional justifications while running for her life made Sarah realize that Stevens wasn't just a predator. He was someone who had completely lost touch with reality while maintaining the outward appearance of a respected educator. The decisions Stevens made during this pursuit revealed someone operating under the influence of a psychological break that had been building for months or possibly years. His belief that he had saved Emma from inferior teaching and provided her with superior individual attention demonstrated a level of self-deception that made him infinitely more dangerous than a simple criminal. The transformation from pursued victim to survivor happened in those crucial seconds as Sarah burst through the forest and spotted her Toyota Camry behind the abandoned barn. Her legs burned with exhaustion, but the adrenaline coursing through her system pushed her forward with a mother's desperate strength. The journey to safety began the moment she threw herself into the driver's seat and slammed the locks, just as Stevens' rage-filled face appeared at her passenger window. Behind the scenes of what should have been a simple escape, Stevens was demonstrating the same calculated persistence that had allowed him to maintain Emma's captivity for over a year. The psychological impact of seeing him sprint toward his own silver Honda while she fumbled with her keys was overwhelming. The mindset that had driven him to kidnap and imprison a teenager was now focused entirely on preventing Sarah from destroying the twisted world he had created. The chase that followed tested every driving skill Sarah had ever possessed as she careened onto Pine Ridge Road with Stevens in close pursuit. The hidden truth about her desperation became evident in the decisions she made, running stop signs, taking curves at dangerous speeds, weaving through residential neighborhoods where children might be playing. The revelations about Stevens' true nature had transformed her from a cautious driver into someone willing to risk everything to escape a predator. The impact of their high-speed pursuit through quiet Oregon neighborhoods created exactly the kind of attention that would ultimately save both Sarah and Emma. Behind the scenes of what felt like a nightmare chase scene, multiple residents were calling 911 to report reckless driving, providing law enforcement with real-time updates on Stevens' location, even as Sarah managed to lose him in the heavier traffic near the highway. But Stevens' fatal mistake came when he returned to his grandmother's property, apparently believing he could still salvage his carefully constructed prison. The transformation from pursuer to captured happened in seconds, as Officer Marcus Wright spotted the silver Honda approaching 4847 Pine Ridge Road, where police units had already positioned themselves based on Sarah's earlier 911 call. The journey from predator to prisoner was swift and decisive. The moment Stevens saw the police cars surrounding his property, his composed teacher facade cracked completely. His attempt to flee in reverse was blocked by Officer Wright's patrol unit, and within seconds, officers had him out of the car and in handcuffs. The mindset that had allowed him to rationalize over a year of imprisonment and psychological manipulation finally collided with the reality of law enforcement intervention. The revelations that would emerge from Stevens' arrest would expose the full scope of his elaborate deception, but the immediate priority was reaching Emma and beginning the delicate process of extracting her from the psychological prison he had constructed around her mind. With Stevens in custody, the real work began as officers methodically searched the property that had served as Emma's prison for over a year. The transformation from crime scene to rescue operation required expertise that went far beyond standard police procedures. Detective Rodriguez coordinated with specialists who understood the psychology of long-term captivity and the delicate process of extracting victims who had been systematically conditioned to accept their imprisonment. The journey to finding Emma tested every investigative skill the team possessed. The main floor of the grandmother's house appeared completely normal. Family photos, dated furniture, and the accumulated dust of a property that hadn't seen regular occupancy. Behind the scenes of this ordinary facade, Stevens had created something far more sophisticated than anyone had imagined. The hidden truth about the basement's construction would reveal months of careful planning and modification. Deputy Sarah Martinez made the crucial discovery when she noticed something unusual about the water heater in the basement utility room. The appliance was positioned strangely, pushed forward from the wall in a way that suggested it had been moved recently. The psychological impact of finding a concealed door behind the heater was immediate. This wasn't improvised imprisonment. This was engineered captivity designed to remain undetected indefinitely. The sophistication of Stevens' hiding place became evident as officers revealed a narrow hallway leading to a steel-reinforced door with multiple deadbolts that locked exclusively from the outside. The mindset required to construct such an elaborate prison while maintaining the appearance of a normal family property demonstrated a level of premeditation that chilled everyone involved in the investigation. But nothing could have prepared the rescue team for what they discovered when they finally opened that final door. Emma sat at a small desk, pencil in hand, working on what appeared to be calculus problems with the same focused attention she had once brought to her regular classroom assignments. The transformation from the confident teenager in her school photos to this pale, thin figure hunched over academic work was heartbreaking evidence of Stevens' psychological manipulation. The impact of seeing Emma alive but so thoroughly conditioned was overwhelming for everyone present. She looked up at the officers with hollow eyes that seemed to struggle with the concept that strangers had entered her controlled environment. Her first words weren't cries for help or expressions of relief, but concerns about finishing her assignments and maintaining the perfect grades that Stevens had convinced her were essential for her future. The revelations about Emma's psychological state became clear as she clutched her notebook with trembling hands, asking about deadlines and test schedules as if this rescue were simply an interruption to her studies rather than liberation from captivity. The decision Stevens had made to maintain her education while holding her prisoner had created a reality where Emma genuinely believed academic achievement was more important than freedom. The most heartbreaking aspect of Emma's rescue was witnessing the depth of psychological conditioning that Stevens had achieved over 13 months of isolation and manipulation. The transformation from kidnapped teenager to compliant student was so complete that Emma's primary concern wasn't her freedom, but whether missing class time would affect her college applications. The hidden truth about Stockholm Syndrome became painfully evident as she repeatedly asked officers about her homework deadlines and whether someone could contact her teachers about makeup assignments. Behind the scenes of what should have been a joyful reunion, medical professionals and trauma specialists worked to assess Emma's psychological state. The mindset that Stevens had cultivated in his victim was so thoroughly ingrained that she genuinely believed her academic performance was more important than her physical liberation. The journey from captive to free person would require extensive therapy to help Emma understand that her worth wasn't measured by perfect grades or academic achievement. The psychological impact on Sarah was devastating as she watched her daughter prioritize schoolwork over celebrating her rescue. Emma's concerns about maintaining her GPA, completing assignments that Stevens had given her, and not falling behind other students revealed how completely he had warped her understanding of reality. The decisions he had made to continue her education while holding her captive had created a prison of the mind that would be far more difficult to escape than the physical basement. Meanwhile, in the interview room at the Riverside County Sheriff's Department, Stevens began revealing the twisted rationale behind his actions with the same calm authority he had once brought to parent-teacher conferences. The transformation from respected educator to confessed kidnapper was marked by his continued belief that his actions had been justified and even beneficial for Emma's development. The revelations that emerged from Stevens' confession painted a picture of someone who had been planning this abduction for years, not months. He described noticing Emma's special potential from her very first day in his freshman biology class 3 years earlier, when she was just 14 years old. The impact of learning that he had been targeting Emma from such a young age was devastating for everyone involved in the investigation. Stevens's detailed account of how he had recognized Emma's vulnerability after her parents' divorce revealed the calculated nature of his approach. He spoke about her desperate need for approval, her academic anxieties, and her fear of disappointing her mother with the clinical detachment of someone who had studied his victim like a laboratory specimen. The mindset required to exploit a teenager's emotional trauma for predatory purposes demonstrated a level of manipulation that went far beyond simple criminal behavior. Stevens' confession revealed the systematic nature of his grooming process with chilling clarity. He described exploiting Emma's academic anxiety and desperate need for approval with the same methodical approach he brought to designing lesson plans. The transformation from legitimate teacher to manipulative predator had been so gradual that Emma never recognized the boundaries being crossed. His detailed account of offering special tutoring sessions that slowly became more controlling demonstrated a mindset that viewed manipulation as simply another form of education. The hidden truth about how Stevens maintained psychological control over Emma emerged as he explained using her grades as leverage with disturbing pride. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be academic support, he was creating a system where Emma's self-worth became entirely dependent on his approval and assessment. The psychological impact of this conditioning was evident in how he described Emma's growing compliance and eagerness to please him, her desperation to maintain the perfect grades that he had convinced her were essential for her future success. The journey from inappropriate teacher behavior to kidnapping accelerated when Stevens learned about Sarah's potential job opportunity in Seattle. The revelations about his reaction to this news painted a picture of someone who had become so possessive of his victim that the thought of losing control over her drove him to unprecedented extremes. The decisions he made in response to this threat revealed the true depth of his obsession and delusion. Stevens described his months of preparation for the basement prison with the same meticulous attention to detail that had made him an effective teacher. The transformation of his grandmother's root cellar into a sophisticated holding facility required extensive planning, soundproofing materials, ventilation systems, and the installation of basic living amenities. The mindset required to prepare such an elaborate prison while maintaining his normal teaching responsibilities demonstrated someone operating with a terrifying level of compartmentalization. The impact of learning about the actual kidnapping was devastating for everyone listening to Stevens' confession. He recounted intercepting Emma during her routine Saturday morning walk with Max on the Centennial Trail, using chloroform obtained from old chemistry supplies that the school should have disposed of years earlier. The revelations about how he had studied her patterns, chosen his timing, and executed the abduction with calculated precision showed someone who had planned every detail while maintaining the facade of a concerned teacher helping with the search efforts. His casual description of how Emma didn't suffer during the chloroform-induced unconsciousness revealed his complete disconnection from the reality of his actions. The journey from respected educator to confessed kidnapper was marked by his continued belief that he had been protecting Emma from inferior educational opportunities and family instability. At Cedar Valley Hospital, trauma specialist Dr. Patricia Hamilton faced one of the most complex cases of psychological manipulation she had encountered in her 15-year career. The transformation from physical rescue to mental rehabilitation would prove to be far more challenging than anyone had anticipated. Behind the scenes of Emma's medical evaluation, a team of specialists worked to understand how 13 months of systematic conditioning had fundamentally altered a bright teenager's perception of reality. Dr. Hamilton's assessment revealed the devastating effectiveness of Stevens' psychological manipulation. The hidden truth about Emma's mental state was that she had developed severe Stockholm Syndrome, a condition where victims develop positive feelings toward their captors as a survival mechanism. The mindset that Emma had adopted to endure her captivity had become so deeply ingrained that she genuinely believed Stevens had been protecting her rather than imprisoning her. The psychological impact of complete isolation with only her captor for human contact had created a reality where Emma couldn't distinguish between education and abuse, between care and control. The journey from independent teenager to psychologically dependent victim was evident in every interaction she had with medical staff. Her primary concerns remained focused on academic performance rather than processing the trauma of her experience. The decisions that medical professionals made regarding Emma's treatment would determine whether she could eventually reclaim her sense of self or remain trapped in the psychological prison that Stevens had constructed around her mind. The revelations about the depth of her conditioning meant that traditional therapy approaches would need to be carefully modified to avoid triggering defensive responses that could set back her recovery. When Sarah was finally allowed to have an extended reunion with Emma, the transformation in their relationship became heartbreakingly apparent. Emma responded to her mother with polite distance, as if greeting a stranger who had interrupted important work. The impact of watching her daughter prioritize completing assignments over celebrating their reunion was devastating evidence of how thoroughly Stevens had rewired her understanding of what mattered in life. Emma's continued focus on college applications and grade point averages revealed how completely Stevens had convinced her that academic achievement was the only measure of human worth. Behind the scenes of what should have been a joyful homecoming was the painful reality that Emma still believed her captor's version of events, that he had saved her from mediocre education and family dysfunction. The journey ahead would require Emma to slowly rebuild her understanding of healthy relationships, appropriate boundaries, and her own intrinsic value beyond academic performance. The mindset that Stevens had cultivated through months of praise, punishment, and isolation would take years of careful therapy to dismantle. Emma's story reminds us that the people we trust most with our children's development can sometimes hide the darkest intentions. The transformation from respected educator to predatory captor happened so gradually that even the most attentive parent could miss the warning signs. Behind the scenes of every school, every after-school program, every trusted mentor, relationship, we need to maintain the kind of vigilance that could prevent another family from enduring what Sarah and Emma experienced. This case changed how law enforcement approaches missing person investigations and how schools monitor teacher-student interactions. The journey from Emma's disappearance to her rescue reveals the importance of trusting our instincts as parents, even when those instincts contradict what trusted authority figures tell us. The mindset that allowed Stevens to operate undetected for years is unfortunately not unique, which is why stories like this matter so much. If you found value in understanding how this investigation unfolded and the warning signs that might protect other families, I'd really appreciate you subscribing to the channel. The research that goes into these cases takes considerable time, but sharing these stories could genuinely help someone recognize dangerous situations before it's too late. The impact of true crime content isn't just entertainment. It's education that could save lives. If you made it through this entire difficult but important story, let me know by commenting, "I stayed until the end." It helps me understand which stories resonate most with you and what kind of content provides real value to this community. And if this video created that connection where you felt like you were right there with Sarah during her desperate search, a like would mean a lot. It's those small gestures that keep these stories reaching the people who need to hear them. There's a video right here that complements this topic perfectly. It explores how predators use positions of authority to gain access to victims, and the psychological techniques they employ to maintain control. Click and continue with me over there, because understanding these patterns could be the knowledge that protects someone you care about.